Welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP Jon Poz. With me is a returning guest, of course. You may know him from The Ringer or the Way of the Blade book or the Way of the Blade the podcast. He is, of course, the legendary Phil Schneider. Phil, welcome back. How you doing?
Oh, it's great to be back with you, John. Doing good.
Obviously, it's under a little bit different circumstance this time around because we're honoring Jay Briscoe today on this episode. So it's a little bit of a Jay Briscoe tribute episode. R.I.P. to Jay. Just awful, awful tragedy. Just shocked to have heard the news. A great guy, and obviously we'll get into what a great wrestler he was. But man, what did you think when you heard the news? I mean, I was
It's
floored. What a gut punch.
pretty devastating, and it's tough, man. I got little kids now, and just that part of it, right, where the guy was a father, and he's leaving. The kids got hurt, and he's got the family man part of it really hit me in the way that when you're a callow single person, that this stuff doesn't punch you in the same way, right? It's a thing like a car accident. We've all everybody's driven, over their lives has been in near misses or accidents, and I mean that's just part of it. And you think, oh man, of all the times that something almost happened to you, and so yeah, it hit me pretty hard, especially just he was such a big part of 2022, right? Like, he was a guy who was sort of, I mean, for a guy who wrestled a really, really long time, and we're talking about his career a little bit, was really almost like peaking in the last year with that series of matches against FTR. It's like he was such a vibrant part of current wrestling. And, really maybe more relevant than he'd ever been. So it was a tough one.
Man, what a gut punch. That was just gut wrenching. And then hear about the kids is like, oh, what an awful, awful story. Just absolutely shocking. And you're right, because 2022 was Supercard of Honor, Death Before Dishonor, and Final Battle. That trio, or whatever you want to call them, the series of three matches against FTR. I mean, they were on the cusp of probably not being on TV because of the whole Warner Brothers thing. I mean, or Warner Brothers Discovery thing. We don't have to get into that too much, but it's one of the things where it's like everybody was talking about those matches and everybody was seeking them out because, man, one was better than the other, and all three were fantastic.
Yeah, and, that last handful of years in ROH was kind of a weird promotion. I don't think people weren't really checking for it as much, right? So they were kind of existing in this world that, especially after the elite guys left ROH. I just think it was a little bit of a zombie promotion in a lot of ways, and the Briscoes were still there and still doing their thing. But I don't think they weren't as part of the zeitgeist as much as they really were over the last year. Right? Although was been some fun later period Briscoe stuff. Their match on the farm against each other was probably the best cinematic wrestling match ever. That's a style of match I don't particularly like, but I really enjoyed that. And so they were still part of it a little bit, but this really felt like, oh man, these guys are really going to be a huge part of whatever Tony Khan does with ROH, and just tough. And then obviously the more sad than just a wrestling man part of it, just a guy with a father and family man, and seemingly I never had any direct personal interaction with him, but seemingly a lovely guy that people really had a lot of fondness for or worked with him.
I always love to go back and check my messages and stuff because I'm like, I know I've talked to because I've interviewed the Briscoes before a while back, but I was like, I want to know what the interaction was because I just remember them being like the nicest guys. Going back, I'm not obviously going to divulge the information, but going back and reading this stuff, it's like, man, like kind of like quirky, but in like in a cool way, almost like Steiner Brothers esque a little bit, like where like he's like a little crazy, but not like such a nice guy. What a cool guy! I was just reading some of the messages, like kind of laughing to myself. I was like, wow, he's like quirky but funny but cool but like tough. It's like a weird like combination of a character. Was like, so what a cool guy. It's like just reading back some of the stuff that he said to me. I was like, wow, what a nice guy, but like really like fun. Just I don't know, just exemplified like to me somebody that I would like want to have a beer with.
And we were posting a lot on Twitter. People were posting up all those Jay Briscoe promos, and a lot of those I hadn't seen before. And man, he was, some of those are really great. I mean, the one with that Matt Hardy posted about where Matt Hardy is futzing around with the edge trimmer on the lawn, and then Jay just does this like absolutely like artistic job of single-handing edging this lawn and then just stares in the camera. I was just like, like, man, that's the, that's, I don't know, top 25, top 30 all-time wrestling pro. We didn't say a word, just, and some of those other ones too. And the sort of interactions with him and Mark were really developed. Like when we started watching the Briscoes, they were two kind of kids, shaved head, looked a lot alike. And, they were, I don't really think of them as great, like, wrestling characters in 2003, right? But over the course of his career, he really evolved into like an all-time great wrestling character in addition to being an all-time great wrestler, right? Like he's not not only one of the more talented in-ring guys in of his era, but also he's like Jimmy Valiant almost.
So cool, like just the way that they were able to just be themselves, but be such like over the top with it. Like such great wrestling characters, almost old school to the bone to a certain extent. Like you're saying, like a Jimmy Valiant, or even like a Rick Steiner type, like just a very over the top version of themselves. So it's so true to them, and it's just so funny. It's like they're on the chicken farm, they're cutting funny promos. He's going, Terry Funk don't wear no mouthpiece. Bruiser Brody don't wear no mouthpiece. I mean, just funny stuff that he just say off the cuff, but it's like, man, that's wrestling to me. And the characters that I always connect with, I always like, man, this guy's over the top, but that's him. He's Briscoe. You know what I mean?
That's
That's
always the
him.
greatest wrestling character is always some sort of person who's 10% more but themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm Jay Briscoe. Jay Briscoe is just Jay Briscoe turned up to 11, right? Like Rick, Scott Steiner turned up to 11, right? Ric
Yeah.
Flair turned up to 11. That's always the best, rather than somebody who's kind of like pigeonholed into something weird or strange that are not like them, right? You can always kind of tell when somebody's taking acting classes and when somebody's just riffing and being themselves. It's always way better.
So the first time I saw them wrestle was 2003, Death Before Dishonor. It was them going after the tag titles with AJ, and Amazing Red was on the other team. Obviously, him and his brother Mark. Man, I was like, these guys, like you said, didn't develop the characters, but they were such good wrestlers at this point. And I'm like, wait, how old are they? 19 and 18? It's like, man, my God, they're so young at this point. In '03, it's like they're like little babies, but they're awesome. And you just kind of grew to like them even more. When's the first time you saw them?
So I first time I saw them was the 2001 Best of the Best in CZW. So
Wow, so
that would
about
have been
17,
May.
16 at that point.
Yeah, this was in May 2001. So they were both, and this was a show I went to live. And I remember going into it, wanting to go to it live because it had Minoru Fujita and Winger and Juventud Guerrero were all on that show. So it's like this kind of cool group of like international guys.
Yeah.
And so we kind of did the road trip down to New Jersey. I was in DC at that point. With my buddy Tom Kay, and I met Rob Naylor there. I think Rob Naylor, another like longtime wrestling guy.
I was just talking to him yesterday. Yeah, yeah.
That was the first time I'd ever met Rob. He's a good friend of mine now. And we all at the show, and it was just like they had a match against each other. There was a 3-way with them and Nick Mondo was the first round. The first round of this Best of the Best were all 3-ways for some reason. And then they had a 3-way with Nick Mondo, and then they had a match against each other that was like a real show stealer. Where it's like this was the thing that everybody is going to remember from this show, where they started out working almost exclusively on the mat. And it was all this really cool mat wrestling. I remember starting a holy shit chant from like a takedown. Or something like that, where it's like, just because these guys and then they obviously escalated into crazy stuff after crazy stuff, move after crazy move. And I actually remember that I was standing next to the Briscoes' mom, and she was like she like nervously grabbed my shoulder, like during the point where they were like putting each other through a table or doing some crazy spot with chairs. And so it really was cool. It was like these two guys who, maybe you'd heard the name, but they hadn't really broken out yet. And they had the thing where it's like, these are the guys that everyone's talking about at the end of the show, not guys like Trent Acid or, Johnny Kashmir were the big stars at CW at that point, not Juventud Guerrero or Fujita or Winger, who were the big international guys. It was these two, kids from Delaware. They were the stars of the show.
And with the
And so then
show
I
I
was
was at,
checking for them, after that for sure. I think I was that was a real like glory period for indie being an indie wrestling fan, right? Even the pre ROH period where you had like JPW, having these great stuff and all of these CZW having a bunch of really talented people, and you had this whole like generation of really young kids. So Briscoes, the SATs in Red, Homicide, Loki, Xavier, all of these guys just going on these shows in the Northeast and like every weekend. And you'd find somebody who had the tape who would send you the tape of this happening in ICW or this happening in USA Pro or this happening in JBW. We're just like, holy hell, this is this, real generation of super talented kids really coming up. And the Briscoes were a big part of that.
big time. And I remember thinking, because Jeff Hardy was on the show that I was at, I was like, oh, see, he was maybe was Will o' the Wisp or whatever, got booed out of the building. But it's just funny to think, like, I think they thought he was going to be like the big star coming to this show. Like, nope, it was Joe, it was Punk, it was the Briscoes. Like, those were the guys that the crowd was really into.
Right. Yeah. And I'm obviously this was a long time ago. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure I was at the first ROH show.
Oh, Murphy Wreck.
The first one, yeah, where it had Red and versus Amazing Red versus Jay,
Yep.
and then Mark was at that point too young to wrestle in Philadelphia because he was at a certain age. I think he was still 17 or something, and then Jay was 18 or 19. So I felt like that very that that was like an undercard match, but like one where you're like, holy moly, these guys really blew it out. And then obviously I'd been checking for those guys because I'd seen the Briscoes, I'd seen Amazing Red before, sort of leading up to that on tape, and I think I've seen Amazing Red live a couple times.
It's interesting. That's technically the first match ever in Ring of Honor history because the match that was before it, Gabe like wiped it off the history of Ring of Honor. So like that match didn't exist. So technically Amazing Red versus Jay Briscoe is the first ever match.
Was the first one Hit Squad versus Christopher Street Connection? Is that like the
something
first
like that? But I know it was the Hit Squad and I thought it was Christopher Street Connection, but there might have been somebody else in that match, but it was so bad according to Gabe that I guess it never made it anywhere. They must have like got rid of it because when you first watch Ring of Honor, the first match is Briscoe versus Red. So you're like, oh,
yeah, I think it was also like that certainly. I think if I remember correctly, it was the Christopher Street Connection was sort of very over the top gay act, and then it was like a bunch of like scumbag Philly fans chanting "Kill the Homo" or something like that. I remember, like, I think that might have been part of it. Like, it might have just been like if this match wasn't that great, but it was like, you don't really want this to be the historical start of your promotion. Although I remember like Christopher Street Connection were like some JPW guys I really enjoyed. One of them was really stiff. It's like over that period, I was like, oh, this actually acts pretty good. These guys are doing an exotic act, but this one guy is going to like throw crowbar clotheslines too. So it's not necessarily, it kind of works, although I don't think it really worked for what ROH was trying to do.
When you look at it with Jay versus Mark, I always thought, especially early on, because obviously eventually they'll just team and they wouldn't really fight except for really the fight at the compound there in Delaware at the farm. They didn't really have too many one-on-one matches.
I looked that up because I reviewed one for the Ringer. I did a sort of a 5 best, or not 5 best. It was like 5 sort of hidden J gems was the idea. Like these are some matches that are a little less known but really great. So I looked at they had a match against each other in NWA Wildside down in Cornelia, Georgia, where they kind of came down on the undercard of one of the big shows there as like basically unknowns, and then kind of did their match against each other and had a really killer match. It was something ROH returned to a handful of times. When Jay held the title, he defended it against Mark, like 2012 or 2013. I remember I looked these all up because I wanted to see if Mark ever won. Because like of the ones I always remember, it was always like Jay pulling it out. He pulled out the
right. Yeah, it wasn't much. Yeah.
So they maybe wrestled 7 times, and I think Jay won 4, Mark won 2, and there was a couple of draws, maybe 8 times. So it wasn't a lot, but it was a lot. It was early in their careers. It was like sort of a showcase thing. It was their resume was they would work their match against each other, right? That's how they introduced themselves to people in Wildside and CZW. There's a match. Did you ever see their match in Delaware for Hellaware Championship Wrestling?
No.
It's on YouTube. It's I would say it's worth watching. It is, I think the story, there's no story in it. They just showed up at this like almost backyardish Delaware garbage wrestling promotion, and they work like a brawl against each other that is some of like the most violent brawling you'll ever see in wrestling. I mean, they were just absolutely just obliterating each other with chair shots in ways that you're just like, this is bad. You shouldn't do this. Like I was thinking about, maybe I should write up this match at Delaware. And I was like, this isn't really a tribute. At some point, like Jay takes a chair and like opens up Mark's head and like a really nasty gash. He's just bleeding all over the ring. So that's one of their more memorable matches against each other. Probably worth checking out. Like I said, it's on YouTube. Folks can watch it. I think the real sickos would enjoy it. Obviously, that was a big part of the Briscoes too, right? One of the things doing the column I did, I went back and I watched a bunch of stuff, to prep for it, and the versatility of those guys. I mean, that was what really sort of really jumped out at me when I was watching it, is that they could do this kind of like a really like against each other, kind of like a map-based match. The Wild Side one was really a lot of grappling. They could do, gory blood stuff, right? They could do these huge brawls. There's one of the matches I wrote about was this great match again from FIP in Florida against Necro Butcher and Madman Pondo. It's just, like a wild Necro Butcher Madman Pondo match. And the Briscoes are, they're absolutely at home at that, or something like the dog collar match against FTR. And then they were incredible at that kind of Young Bucks, Mirafuji, Kenta, like high spot, tightrope wrestling kind of thing, where it's like, the very complicated moves and reversals and, near falls and that kind of super athletic stuff. They could do that as good as anyone. They could work traditional Southern tag, which is like they're the baby faces and they're working towards a hot tag. There's a match with Chris Hero and Claudio from Toronto that's basically like that match would have worked just as well in the Mid-South Coliseum in 1984, right? And they could be the faces on that, or they could do the heel part of that. I mean, it was, just watching, it was like, man, these guys there's not a style that these guys couldn't work at a super high level, right? You don't usually see people who can do all of those things. Maybe they can do one of them or two of them or something like that. But I mean, these Briscoes, you could just, put them in any role in a wrestling match. Jay was a great dominant champion when he held the ROH world title in like 2014, 2015, right? Like a great ace champion. The other one of the matches I reviewed was a Samoa Joe match, where not the Samoa Joe match that you got to remember, the one where Joe, kicks Jay's head off and he bleeds all over the cage, but one that was like way later. It was at a Super Card of Honor in like 2015, and Joe was coming right off his TNA run, and Jay was the world champion. And it was like watching, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, Terry Gordy or something like that. Just like two big boys pounding on each other in a real way. And it's like, man, he could, what colors did he not have in his palette? It seems like he had all of them.
So versatile. You're right. Definitely.
I think people don't necessarily, when they think of the Briscoes, they think of, they probably don't think of all the different things that they could do. But I mean, those guys, the Warner Brothers thing is a shame, because I think the idea was initially that the Briscoes were going to be part of AEW from the beginning. I think that was something that came up with, like that was something the Bucks wanted them from the start. And man, they would have been a real value add to any promotion that's trying to start out, just because those guys could do anything, and you could put them in any spot against any pair of people and they could, deliver.
Yeah, the Bucks just had, I guess they were really taping BTE or whatever, filming themselves, but they said, they told Tony the original idea for the tag division is the three brothers, the teams, the Lucha Brothers, the Bucks, and the Briscoes, and we'll carry tag team wrestling for AEW, and really for tag team wrestling period, because WWE doesn't do too much of it, or at that point didn't. But really, that was an idea. I was like, wow, that would have been amazing. Briscoes versus the Bucks all over again. They feud obviously in ROH, but that would have been awesome. Them against the Lucha Brothers in AEW would have been awesome to have them in there.
Yeah, I don't think they ever had a one-on-one tag with the Lucha Brothers. They worked. It was like Lucha Brothers and I think it was Lucha Brothers in LA Park against Rush and the Briscoes, or it might have been the Briscoes in LA Park versus Rush and the Lucha Brothers. It was some combination of those six guys worked in Arena Mexico match. That's really great. Also on YouTube, also worth checking out. I considered actually writing about that. I was like on my long list of matches because it's just like really a really cool atmosphere, and but the thing about LA Park rushes when they wrestle each other, they're the story. Right? Like the Briscoes were a cool like second and third guy in a trios match having fun exchanges, but it's hard to watch anybody but LA Park and Rush when LA Park and
Yeah.
Rush wrestle each other. So I was thinking, this isn't really a Briscoes match, although it's really cool. But yeah, I think I'm pretty sure that was their only interaction with the Lucha Brothers, and they would have done some pretty cool stuff with those guys for sure. I mean, there's no tag team over the last 20 years that you couldn't have imagined would have had a great match against the Briscoes. Briscoes Usos would have been incredible if that ever ended up happening, right?
Yeah.
All those big WWE teams would have all had great, great matches against the Briscoes if those opportunities arose. Those guys are just so talented.
Yeah, for sure. And I was just thinking back to Honor Invades Boston, just going back to Mark versus Jay. I remember that match. I was shocked that Mark Briscoe won that match. He beat Jay. I think it was their first match in ROH together.
Right.
And then when I think it was the 1 year anniversary show, Jay then beat Mark in an awesome match. So they were kind of like even back and forth, and then they kind of teamed them up together. But I was like, man, those matches are awesome, and especially given the fact how young they were. It's like, holy shit, they're pretty damn good at a pretty damn young age.
I mean, even if you watch the stuff even earlier than the best of the best, I mean, you can watch their first handful of matches that they ever had it in the ring. You're like, oh man, these guys are really good at, and like even younger than that. They're the ECW. There's an ECW Gauntlet or something, which I think was their first match ever. That ECWA, which is a Delaware promotion, just put up on YouTube, and you watch that, and you're like, oh, these guys are pretty great at even an even younger age. Like not like Mark at 16 and Jay at 17, right? Like, and just starting out. I don't think they have really had any training. Like they weren't trained by anybody. They were kind of trained themselves.
Right,
I think they
were,
grow up a little bit in the ECWA school, and like Glenn Osborne, who I think was the ECWA trainer at that point, was just like, I can't show these kids anything. like he said, I just put them on the show. I don't really have anything to teach them at this point. They're already the ring in the backyard did the job. I don't like. Glenn Osborne's got no notes. Like, so I think that was kind of the story. It was like they were pretty much fully formed from, I'm assuming, wrestling each other, hundreds and hundreds of times on the chicken farm before they ever went into an actual ring. And when they got there, I mean, real prodigies.
Yeah, almost like savants with wrestling. Like they weren't trained by anybody, but they're awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't usually see that, right? You don't usually see, usually people require, there are holes in the games of people who come out that way, right? Like come out that way and they can do maybe some, cool stuff, but you usually need to get in there and have somebody show you how to do the basics. So a lot of wrestlers self-trained me thinking, man, there's 7 moves that look incredible, but they don't really understand how to have a wrestling match. Right. Like, they don't really know how to do a headlock takeover. They don't really know how to throw a good looking punch. They don't really know how to build to moments. They just do them. Whereas the Briscoes is like, they came in pretty fully formed with all that stuff where they can, their basics looked really good. Like I said, their CZW best of the best match, first 6 minutes of that were just those guys doing pretty basic counter mat wrestling, takedowns, reversals, headlocks, head scissors, simple stuff. And you'd watch and go, man, look at that takedown. What a great takedown, right? Like, man, that's a really tight side headlock. That's really great looking. And that, is something that I think they did really well from almost the start, when most wrestlers, especially ones that came from, self-trained like that, they don't have that basic stuff.
See, I love talking to you about some of these guys, and especially Jay Briscoe, because then now I'm going to be like, oh shit, I got to go look at YouTube. I got to check out the Arena Mexico match. I got to check out that Delaware match. You always have these matches. Even I remember Way the Blade reading it like, the hell's that awesome guy's name? Iceberg. It's like he was in this awesome War Games match. I'm like, oh, I was like, now I got to check this out. I was like, oh my god. So you always have those matches, which is great.
That's the thing. That's my value add to the wrestling world, right? Like it is, the ringer stuff. A lot of that is gonna be just writing like what did I think of the best match on Raw. But I also always try to say, it was also really cool. This thing that's that people don't know about, or we're gonna write about dog collar matches. I'm going to find this dog collar match Puerto Rico, or I'm going to find this other match. I let you guys know because that's one of the cool things about being a wrestling fan is you can be as big a freak as I am, and still there's thousands of great matches that you've never seen before. I mean, a lot of this Briscoe stuff I had never seen before. Like a lot of the matches that I wrote up on the Ringer, it was the first time I'd ever seen them. I think 3 of the 5 were like just stuff that I found sort of looking around. I had never seen the Samoa Joe match before. I didn't even really know what happened because like 2015, they said it was like a period where I wasn't really checking ROH. I was like, I didn't know this guy had a match 2015. I wonder if that's any good. And then I watched, I was like, holy shit, this is great. And the one in Toronto between the Briscoes and Hero and Claudio, I remember as a match actually Hero told me about years ago when I had just put the book out, and he was like, oh yeah, because he was in, Chris Hero was in a couple of the book matches in Way of the Blade. I was trying to get him on the podcast, but ended up ever connecting. But he was like, yeah, and I remember the match I bled the most, which was the match with the Briscoes in Toronto. Was pretty good. So I remember like sort of filing that away. Oh, I should check that out. And then I was like doing this. I was like, oh yeah, that match from Toronto. I remember Chris Hero told me about it. I was like, oh man, this is awesome. And the same one with I did an Austin Aries Kota Ibushi versus the Briscoes match. It's like, I didn't know that happened. I wasn't aware that was a match that happened, and it's really good. Those guys, like a great example of those, keeping up with these super athletic guys like Aries and Ibushi, were like top level, athletes in wrestling history. And the Briscoes are like, yeah, we can do that. We can work this, super fast, complicated style with you and look just as good and just as skilled.
Do you have a favorite Jay Briscoe match?
Gosh, that's a good question. It might be the dog collar match. Honestly, like it's just basically his second to last match of his career, sadly. But I mean, that match really blew me away. And I've got some recency bias with these ones I just watched, right, which I really enjoyed. But I think it was the dog collar match. I think it was that FTR. I mean, I did a big piece for the Ringer where I sort of said it before that match happened, over like where I ranked the best dog collar matches of all time. And looking over the piece after that happened, I was like, this is no lower than 2, and it might be number 1. Like with comparing it to Valentine. Obviously, Valentine Piper was number 1, of course, right? It's a no-brainer thing. But watching both those matches sort of really close to each other, I'm like, man, this Briscoe's FTR match might be better. Piper Valentine had kind of a shitty finish. I don't know if you don't remember that, because who remembers what the finish of that match was? But the finish of that match was basically just Piper kind of yanking Valentine off the top rope and like by the chain and then just pinning him. It was kind of, it was okay. That wasn't like, this incredible, moment like the finish of the Briscoes FTR match was. So I don't know, it's interesting. If you're ever looking for something to entertain yourself, comparing those 2 matches, all-time matches, like which one's good. So yeah, I think it was the dog collar match, and you could probably, there's probably 50 matches that you could make legitimate arguments, because obviously it's such a long career and so many opportunities to do cool things. I mean, that's one thing about them never signing with the WWE, right? It's like they got to do their own, they had to paint all of the colors of the rainbow, which you wouldn't have done if you had gone to NXT in 2012 or something like that, right? Like they would have done some cool shit, undoubtedly, in the WWE, but it would have been very much one note in a way that instead they had a chance to do all this other stuff too.
It's almost good they had all that responsibility at the the chicken farm and stuff, because it's like, well, we're not traveling. We got we're still going to take care of the farm here, so we'll stay with ROH. We'll do indies and we'll be ourselves. We don't have to do this corny nonsense.
I mean, I think the combination of those Jade tweets, which were a long time ago, and also the fact that it was for a long time when Confederate shorts. I think that they had some trouble. And I'm not defending either of those things, but I think there was, from the sense I got from people who knew Dave Briscoe, that he evolved past some of that stuff. And it would have been nice if he had a chance to get on TV. It's cool that Mark's going to be on Dynamite tomorrow. Yes. I mean, that's. I'm glad that Tony Khan went ahead and said, let's no, I'm going to put my foot down a little bit on this and kind of try to force the issue and get him on TV, get to do a tribute. And I think, you got to, whatever, think whatever the pros and cons of Tony Khan are, you got to admire him for just, being would be willing to let that sort of sit, right? And just say, look, no, we're going to go ahead and, I want this to happen.
Very good on him. Yeah, I was shocked to see it because I heard early in the day that it probably wouldn't happen. And then all of a sudden it happened. I was like, wow, he really went to bat. Great job by Tony.
I saw the Meltzer clip of saying they're not going to let him on Dynamite 15 minutes before I saw the AEW clip of he's wrestling on Wednesday. Whereas, maybe not even 15 minutes. It really was like during the same Twitter scroll session where I was like, oh shit, oh cool, that's cool, And he should have. I'm imagining him and Jay Lethal, those guys who've wrestled. Mark and Jay Lethal have wrestled each other a lot over the years, and I imagine that'll be really good. I mean, hopefully, it's hard. I imagine it's got to be pretty tough for Mark to sort of do this so soon after this has happened, right? It's been a week, and he's going to be, performing on national television. But again, those guys are pros. Those guys are savants. I have a lot of faith that he's going to be able to deliver something pretty special tomorrow night.
Definitely. Were you at Our Best back in 2004, big ROH show in New Jersey?
What was the man? You're going to have to give me a card, and then even then, I might not remember.
So Steamboat was on there as a referee for Punk and AJ for the Pure title, and the main event was the cage match we were talking about before, Joe versus Jay Briscoe.
No, I wasn't.
Where Jay Briscoe was bleeding like crazy.
Yeah, I wasn't at that one. I would have remembered that cage match. Obviously, I watched it, on tape. Were you at that one live?
Yes. Yep.
That was a wild one.
That was awesome.
And like I said, it was very cool that they had this match, 11 years later, where the hierarchy was completely reversed. That was a cool early ROH story. Was the idea that Joe is having problems with the Briscoes in tag matches. Like he lost some tag matches to the Briscoes, and and it was like this idea of these specialists, right? Like they could get them in tags, but if you got them all in a singles match, they would be in both of them. I think it's singles match with them at that point. And obviously that was Joe at his peak destroyer phase. And he managed. And G Briscoe is a guy who will he's almost a Tommy Rich level bleeder. And that was some where it's like, oh my gosh, call the, he took, that was a 3 aspirin night for him, and he had some other ones. I remember. Do you remember the Age of the Fall debut?
Oh yeah, when that blood when he was upside down. Yeah,
he just gutted him like a deer or something like that. He's blood all over Jimmy Jacobs. Gruesome, but feels like Jay Briscoe's the guy you call if we need to hang somebody upside down, having your blood all over you.
Yeah, like a disgusting amount. Yeah, for sure.
There was a lot of blood, and out of the 5 matches I reviewed, the Pondo Necro tag from FIP, which is on High Spots, if folks want to check that out, had a lot of blood in it. Obviously, those 4 guys, and then the match in Toronto, Jay was also really, really. Both Jay and Mark did some pretty gruesome blade jobs in that, and Hero, all 3 of those guys. And I think Claudio bled a little bit, but. He bled a little bit, and all 3 of those other guys bled a ton. There's a great spot in that match where Mark, the whole a ton of the match is Mark bloody Mark getting worked over by the Kings of Wrestling, and Jay being on the outside waiting for the hot tag. Classic wrestling storytelling. And then when Jay finally gets that hot tag, he comes in and he smashes Hero's head against the turnbuckle 30 times, and at some point around time 12 or 13, Hero Blade, I didn't even really see him do it, but he starts bleeding, and by the end he's smashing his bloody head against the turnbuckle. It's like, man, that is a great hot tag. What an amazing coming in and cleaning house moment that was. The match kept going. Another bunch of twists and turns, and Jay ends up bleeding a ton in that one too. But that guy's been in some. That guy was a vampire. as old school wrestling guys, as ghouls, you got to appreciate a vampire. didn't make Way of the Blade, which is obviously an oversight. Like he's gonna, there'll be some Briscoes in Way of the Blade too if that ever happens for sure.
Yes, get them in there, definitely. With that match at our best, I always think of that as my favorite Jay Briscoe match, just because whenever I'm there and it's live, I don't know, I always rank it higher for whatever reason. I always like it even more. I mean, it's an awesome match. It might be one of his best, but I always rank that as my favorite just because I was there for it. And he was bleeding buckets, and that was great. And it was
Oh
just
man,
like shocking. It's like, oh shit,
Joe nearly kicked his head through the cage a couple times and was running
yeah.
through. He was trying to smash him like a cabbage through the steel cage. Yeah, I mean, I mean, that whole storyline was really cool, like real smart. That was a real high point of the game booking where it's like you have this, Joe kept losing these tags and getting more and more frustrated, and then they have these singles matches where it's like, well, maybe the Briscoes have his number a little bit,
Yeah.
and then maybe not, which was how it ended up.
Very good, good book in there by Gabe. Good stuff, and it showed right then. There, it was like, wow, Jay Briscoe could be a future champion. Obviously, he'd become a future two-time ROH champion. He just kind of showed me there in '04. I was like, man, he can make it to the next level and carry these guys if need be.
Yeah, I mean, he was the guy who could deliver. He delivered in singles matches. He had you could do a 10 greatest Jay Briscoe singles matches. And like, obviously, these tag wrestling is where it's past. I remember there's a great one very early in his career against Justice Payne at CZW for like the CZW world title. And this is like 18-year-old Jay Briscoe that like ended up really, really sort of dramatic singles match. I was like, oh man, is he going to beat Justice Payne? This is CZW. No way. And then he kind of, obviously falls a little short, but, even that young, he was the guy who like I said, had that sort of singles match resume. And then had like a very long ROH world title. I mean, over the course of two, and then, but like he got hurt and had to vacate the title, so he had this period where he was just like a really top singles wrestler in that promotion for a long time, and very very good at it. And it's a pretty memorable matches with Adam Cole and
the ladder war match is awesome. Yeah.
all that sort of crew. I think Adam Page gets a good Adam Page match. And the Samoa Joe one, I think, is a real hidden gem. Have you ever seen that match, John?
I have not actually, and it's funny because I was trying to keep up with ROH, or trying to get back into it around that time period, but I did not see it. So I have to see that match for sure.
On
I need
YouTube.
to see it.
On
Yes,
YouTube,
all right,
very
good.
easy to get to. On YouTube, linked in the. If you look at my rig article, we got the link in there, and
All right, good.
it's
I'm
great.
checking
I
that
mean,
out.
especially because if you love their it's 2004 the cage match so
Yep.
much, it's
Yep.
a very cool sort of bookend for that, right? Where it's like the same two guys years later. Jay's put on 20-30 pounds of muscle, isn't
Yeah.
going to be refuses to get pushed around by Samoa Joe, and that's kind of the story of the match. Where it's like, nah, I'm not going to let you bully me anymore. I'm not a 19-20-year-old kid anymore. I'm the world champion, and you're going to try to do your Samoa Joe, big time me stuff, and I'm going to come back and forearm you right in the jaw as hard as you forearmed me. It's a very cool story, and he was great, and you would love it, especially if you loved the 2004 match so much, because it is kind of this almost evolution where it's like now he's one of the big boys now, and it's going to be a very different story. And Joe is still Joe, so it's like he's coming in like he's gonna wreck shop, and Jay's like, nah, not little brother's not that little anymore.
Yeah. See, I love that time period of ROH because AJ comes back in and he's eventually going to lose to Jay Lethal. It's like the young guys from years before who were great and still able to have good matches with those guys are now able to come into their own, mature, and beat Samoa Joe and AJ Styles when
Right.
they lost to them many, many years earlier, or would have lost them many years earlier. So I kind of like the period, plus the New Japan stuff when Okada and Nakamura come in, and even they have a good tag match against the Briscoes. Like I like that period of ROH because it's like, wow, the guys like Briscoe is starting to take over, and I really enjoyed that period. And I don't think a lot of people saw it, unfortunately.
No, I mean I hadn't seen a lot of that stuff either. Like a lot of it was stuff that I watched over the course of a couple days, between Tuesday and Saturday when I ran my piece, where I just was like, chewing footage. And like, all right, let me watch a ton of stuff and find some stuff that I hadn't seen. I'd remembered the Wildside match. I'd remembered the FIP match. You watched them obviously the thing, but there's all the other ones in there were like, I'm just going to see some stuff I haven't seen, see if I haven't heard of it. That means it's probably pretty obscure. So
Yeah.
it will count for this column.
Yeah, if you hadn't seen it or heard of it, damn, man, that's crazy.
Who spends more time watching wrestling than me? It's a weird hill to die on, but it's my hill.
So we'll wind it down here. We'll head towards the finish of this tribute. Jay Briscoe will probably talk about wrestling with you all day, but you've got stuff to do, and I don't want to keep you too long. But this has been awesome to get you on. Just give me like your thoughts on what you think the legacy of Jay Briscoe was, because to me, one of the guys that I wish was on TV or wish was in a major promotion, because he was one of the best. To me, I'm a Dem Boys Mark, so I'm a big fan of Dem Boys, but to me, one of the best.
Yeah, and I think he's going to go down as the greatest ROH wrestler of all time. I think he's got that now. Obviously, being a guy who was there from the very first match to all the way through the start of the Tony Khan ROH era, never left really. Was there the whole time and basically, and then the 2-time champion, and and there's something. I agree with you. It would have been great to see those guys on TV, but there's something. I'm an old punk rock kid at heart, and there's something about the guys who are just great on their own terms, right? I mean, I'm sure the Briscoes would have been happy to have the paycheck that a WWE run or an AEW run would have provided them, but something cool about guys just like, we're the last outlaws. We're just going to be, in our own world. We're going to go to Japan. We're going to go to Mexico. We're going to work this indie. We're going to work that indie. We're going to work ROH, and we're going to do great things on our own terms. And there's something really cool about that, kind of like that last outlaw mode, right? I mean, I think they really were the one guys from that era who never did end up, on TV, right? Key was on,
Kaval,
WWE Kaval, right? Danielson obviously went on to his huge career. Hero was in NXT for a long time. Claudio's gone on his thing, and AJ Styles obviously has done, was been in the WWE forever, and those guys were the one guys who were like, we're not signing, we're not for whatever reason ever signed to the major label, but have a legacy, an independent, self-created legacy all their own, right? Those guys never did you never saw them doing comedy sketches and with the Bushwhackers on a Raw anniversary show or whatever, right? They were just they were going to do their own, play their own tune. So I think that that's a cool legacy to have, right? I obviously, like I said, I'm not going to begrudge anyone to make a living from things, but I think that's probably his legacy, is kind of the last outlaw, right? Because I mean, it's funny, right? Mark's on AWTV tomorrow, so he's gonna not, Jay. So that's Mark isn't going to be the guy who never ends up on national television, right? Like it's kind of going to be Jay, and so maybe that's a cool. I think that's a cool legacy to have, and obviously, like I said, a complete savant who could really do anything in a wrestling ring, any of the roles. There's not a role that he couldn't play, right? He could be Ricky Morton, he could be Ole Anderson, he could be Buzz Sawyer, he could be Masawa, he could be Ric Flair, right? Like, you just like, what, there's not a thing, you put Jay Briscoe in, you have him play a role, he could do that at any level. And that was the thing. We were watching all the stuff that really stuck out to me. There's not he's going to do anything, did everything. He could do anything, which is, that's pretty cool. Especially, you didn't necessarily think when I was seeing him at 17 years old in CZW, like, okay, this is going to be one of the most versatile and talented wrestlers of the next 20 years. But, that's what he ended up being.
And by all accounts, great guy, great family man, super nice.
And his daughters and his son are going to be his legacy too, right? I mean, that's going to be part of it, right? That's going to be, for all intents, a great dad and an incredible family man, and I'm sure that's I mean, like the best any of us can hope for is to be remembered like that. So,
in my brief interaction with him, like, what a cool guy, what a funny guy, sweetheart of a guy, but also had that like quirkiness about him. We're like, I don't know if you want to mess with this guy either. You know what I mean? You don't want to take any jokes too far, because he's pretty damn tough too. So to me, one of those guys is just like, like I always like almost like the Steiner brothers, where it's like so cool, so awesome. You could joke with him, you can prank with him, but don't push him too far because they could kill you. You know what I mean? Like he's a tough guy too, and he's one of them boys. You don't want to mess with a guy like that for sure.
Right, for sure.
But Phil, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate all the time talking about Jay Briscoe. Obviously, R.I.P. to Jay Briscoe.